Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee of the Combined Authority for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. We have an interesting agenda ahead of us, including, I hope, the Mayor, who will be appearing virtually in a little while, and also a discussion about the budget and the medium-term financial plan of the authority. So I'm going to ask, by way of introduction, whether there are any apologies for absence.
No apologies received.
Thank you. I think we have a full house, and I believe, though I stand to be corrected, that it's Councillor Iqbal's first meeting. So welcome to the committee today. So the minutes of the previous meeting are in the pack. Are we happy to accept those as a correct record of the meeting? Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Does any member have any declaration of interest that they need to make on any item on the agenda? No, thank you. And public questions, I believe there are none received. No, okay. So we should, if the Mayor is available, be able to move straight on to our questions for the Mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. The Mayor is not with us at the moment. I think if the Mayor doesn't appear very shortly, subject to our next presenters being available, I'll move on to item 6 and come back to item 5 shortly. Ah, right, okay. I believe the Mayor may be about to join us. There's no sign that that has happened yet.
Hello, Councillor Dupre.
Good morning, Mayor. We were a bit worried there, but good to see you with us.
Apologies for my delay.
Right, okay. We have a number of questions for you, which are in your role as the chair of the Combined Authorities Transport and Infrastructure Committee, and I see that we have Roland Potter as well joining. So welcome, Roland. So if I just jump straight into the questions, I know you have a busy agenda, and take those in order. And I'll ask members to read the questions, I think, for clarity. Councillor Dew, would you like to start with your question, please?
Thank you, Chair. I wish I'd written a shorter question now. Here we go. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning.
The A1096 London Road St Ives, when proposals were brought forward for the rerouting of the A14, these are supported by the then local authorities. It was generally accepted that most communities and roads would be at worst neutral, or in many cases substantially better off than they were before. In Huntingdonshire, however, it was accepted that two particular roads would be adversely affected and would carry more traffic than they had before. The first of these is the Brampton Road in Huntingdon, which has now had some mitigation, the new link roads, to the A1307. The second is the A1096 London Road St Ives, where it's accepted that more traffic would use this road to access the now A1307 and the new A14, as opposed to heading across the fens that they had done in the past. Now the new road works are complete, it is notable that the volume of traffic, as anticipated, is increasing, with large volumes of this being commercial traffic. This increase is taking place even at the time that COVID has been there, when there's been less vehicles using the roads because many people have been working from home. I'm extremely pleased to be supporting the work programme regarding A41 around Huntingdon and the inclusion of St Ives in the study, and I think that's an excellent project that we're doing. However, I am disappointed. I have made the point at the meetings I've been at in the past that these studies now stop at the London Road, Harrison Road roundabout. This is exactly at the point where the road I'm referring to joins, and it actually connects from there to the A1307. Could I please ask the Mayor if he would be prepared to ask officers to expand the study to include this road all the way from the point where it joins to the A1307? At the moment it stops just outside St Ives. It doesn't go. It stops before the end of St Ives and doesn't go all the way. So that's what I've got to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Dew, it's a very helpful question. And I recognise the area well, as it's not a million miles away from my home address, and it's an area that often I use to commute to get to Ely. And thank you also for the recognition of the work that's been done around that area, and particularly around the sort of consultation work of St Ives trying to alleviate those problems. Basically, I'm very pleased to see that the A14100 and St Ives business case has been progressing well, and of course equally delighted to see that the feasibility study implementation projects for St Ives are proposed to be brought forward. Now, in relation to this particular road and the A1096, this is, as you say, not currently within the scope of those projects, and to add it at this point, I think would be undermining of the great work that we've done to date. However, should Huntingdonshire District Council, and obviously that's alongside Cambridgeshire County Council, wish to sponsor a specific study on the A1096, and if there is that budget available, then yes, I think I would happily see it debated at the Transport and Infrastructure Committee with recommendations to the Combined Authority Board. And of course, it goes without saying, with the new direction of the Combined Authority and the sustainable growth ambitions, I would particularly support sustainable transport solutions and investment as a priority to encourage people out of their cars first, alongside any work that we would be considering together, cooperating.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Dew, do you have a supplementary question?
If I may, please, Chair. Yeah, no, I thank you for that. I do appreciate the answer. I think the final part that you brought forward regarding sustainable transport is in fact another part of what local residents in that area have brought to me and other local members, that you know, as a separate chance they actually want to see that happen. So that's encouraging to see that. I think the major problem there at the moment is the part that is causing the problem is the vehicles that were going out across the fens, and mostly, you know, the ones that are rerouting are the larger commercial vehicles. And with the greatest respect in the world, if we get enough butchers' bikes, we can probably get everyone out of the commercial vehicles, but it's not going to do the job instantly. So I think we need to find some way of taking that forward. Whether or not it's a Huntingdonshire District Council or a County Council project, I don't know, but one of the two probably needs to bring it. But I would welcome the chance probably to discuss it a bit more with yourself. And, you know, I know that I get a lot of requests from local residents, and they're getting quite upset at the minute because as the road's getting busier, the traffic is starting to go through the villages of Hemmingford, Grey and Abbots, and also Fen Stanton, which is causing problems off. So I think it's important that even if it's not part of this study, that it's brought along quite quickly afterwards. So if we can follow that up, either meet there or have a chat sometime, I'd be really grateful. Thank you.
And my response to that would be, Councillor Dew, that I'm sure myself, representatives from the transport team, Roland's on the meeting as we speak, would be more than happy to make their time to meet you. And indeed, if you want to bring along residents as well as a kind of part of that meeting, more than happy to make that arrangement.
No, that would be useful, because I find, you know, if I act as a postman with the residents, it's always never quite the same as hearing it from the, if you'll excuse the analogy, the horse's mouth. You know, you can understand it's not me pushing it along the road. There are other issues along there, and you can expect that. So I will arrange that. Thank you very much. I
would never call you a horse, Councillor.
Thank you very much indeed. And the second question is also from Councillor Dew.
Yeah.
I am listening. I'm just going to answer my door.
Okay, see, is that enough already? Sits next to me for 2 years at a planning committee. Now I can't face this.
Sorry, my apologies. Thank you.
Okay. Right, good morning. Next one is more of a question around cycling routes and active travel. I've been made aware that although St Ives to Huntingdon was identified as an important route for improvement in the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, but I'm advised by County Council, who would have to fund this, that there are no funds at present to implement this scheme. You recently asked at a County Council Parish Forum regarding this route and indicated that HDC would need to include it within their infrastructure plan, but it is actually already there. As you can see, the county have no funds to implement this, and I was wondering if you would be prepared to engage in using active travel funds or other similar funds that you may have access to, or to obviously try and deliver the complete link between the two towns.
Absolutely, Councillor Dew. So I think this is the curse of being invited along to various meetings, but it was a very good, and I was very pleased to be part of the County Council's opportunity for a conference to speak to Parish Council and Town Council members. So I do remember the question coming up, and in regard to the route, again, one I know very well from a sort of local knowledge. You are correct, Huntingdon District Council may have it in their plan, but they, with Cambridgeshire County Council, need to prioritise it as a budgetary ask through the appropriate governance process for it to be considered and prioritised accordingly. We are bringing to the Combined Authority a more focus on active travel funds, and if it fits into that area, then maybe that's where we could be doing it as a cooperation between ourselves and look towards it. And I will be happy to see it progress through Transport and Infrastructure Committee with the recommendation to the Combined Authority where it can be debated appropriately. I agree, more active travel.
No, just to supplement you on that one, I followed up, but obviously you were kind enough to give me the answer on that in advance. I think HCC probably have done their bit on it insofar as within Huntingdonshire, they have done the design brief, and the commissioning side would be the County Council. So I think probably HCC on that part, we've said a couple of times that they need to be involved. I think initially you didn't know. Probably that the plan had been done, it has been. So I think so, but also apparently Cambridge County Council did look at this some time ago and decided the engineering challenges meant it was not cost effective. So obviously it's moved a bit further than you and I think. So if once again we could follow up on how we could take that forward outside of this, it would be really useful. And you know, as you quite rightly say, if we can engage and use active travel to do something on a route where people want to actually use it, and that's where the pressure's coming from, that'd be tremendous. Thank you.
And I'm happy to acknowledge again from myself any confusion from myself. I recognise how HDC have been pushing and have done good work on this in terms of establishing it as an ask with Roland, with the Combined Authority, with County Council, with Hope. We will work with Huntingdon District Council, and if it fits within the remit of active travel and it's within the funds, then you know it would be something I would like to see. But for everybody, because I think it's a wonderful route between both Huntingdon and St Ives. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next question is from Councillor Rippeth.
Good morning.
Good
How
morning.
do you propose to support enhanced cycling infrastructure across the area to make it cycling a viable alternative for more residents and commuters?
I'd like to think in giving the two previous answers, I've already given highlights to the importance of sort of active travel within kind of the transport plans of the future. But basically, as I hopefully you'll acknowledge, in June last year, shortly after my appointment as the mayor, the sort of decisions were taken by Cambridgeshire County Council and Peterborough City Council, which challenged the active travel funding already received and all future potential capability funding. Let's be open about those challenges. I mean, I was delighted, therefore, to then meet with the minister and his representative and assure them that as a practicing medic, you know, with a real passion for public health and advocacy for transport improvements in cycling and walking, that I would commit to working with both highways authorities to seek resolution to those particular challenges that made them make the decisions they did. And then, more importantly, to develop and dedicate a resource to active travel and to seek to appoint an active travel czar. I am still very much wedded to those ambitions. Now, I'm proud, and I think it was important to be honest with the minister at the time, that as a result of that meeting, we saved the historic funding, and we have subsequently, and I think this is a positive story, received over £500,000 of additional funding reported at November board, and we are optimistic in relation to our additional bids that include the sort of capability tranche 3, social prescribing, the mini Hollands, and and bids for tackling loneliness that the team are working on now. So, Cambridge County Council have appointed a dedicated active travel lead and set up an active travel working group. The Combined Authority have appointed Sustrans to conduct a dedicated piece of evaluation work, travel as a prioritised mode of transport and securing budget in addition to the dedicated capability fund monies. So I think we are demonstrating that my officers, or the officers of the Combined Authority, have engaged external support dedicated to cycling and walking. And one of the first actions will be a survey of elected members in relation to cycling and walking. And finally, in addition, Combined Authority officers are working closely with officers across the region. And I'm pleased to see that working groups are becoming established with dedicated cycling and walking resource. I'd like to think that there is been a significant change, and I'm proud of that, is what we're bringing to the Combined Authority going forward, that we are now prioritising cycling and walking. And I will continue to encourage that and the growth in this area. And I hope that answers your question, Councillor Rippeth.
Thank you. Before I bring Councillor Rippeth back for her supplementary question, Roland Potter has his hand up. Roland, was there something you wanted to say?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. Mayor Johnson was not aware of this information because it's only just come to me, but in addition to the £500,000 that he quotes there, we did have a submission for social subscribing, which we collated in collaboration with the public health lead in the region. And it has been publicly announced by the DFT that we were one of the successful few of the many authorities that put in for funding for that, oversubscribed significantly, and we have been awarded a sum of £60,000 to produce a feasibility study for the delivery of active travel, cycling, walking through the social prescribing connectivity with medical centres, GPs, etc., etc. So I'm sorry, Mayor, that I wasn't able to give you that information prior to this meeting, but I thought it was relevant that I brought it up.
Thank you very much, Roland. Breaking news as it happens, get it all here. Councillor Rippeth, did you have a supplementary?
Yes, I still have a supplementary. You mentioned a lot about working with different groups, and you've listed a lot of those. Thank you. Can I be assured that you will continue to work with the Greater Cambridge Partnership to make sure ideas are aligned and that channels of communication are kept open to avoid any further delays?
Absolutely. I think actions speak louder than words. Being part of going along to the GCP meetings, working closely with all members, encouraging the team of the Combined Authority to engage actively in all areas, not just in active travel, with the GCP has been an absolute mantra since I arrived. I can't see any reason why that good working on the good relationships that we've already established over the last half a year shouldn't continue over into the foreseeable future.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Our fourth question is from Councillor van der Weyer.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, Mayor. Thank you for coming. My question is whether you would be able to update us on the current expectations on timescales of the different stages of the revision of the local transport and connectivity plan. Thank you.
I'd be happy to. A paper, my apologies for why I was being late because we were discussing this just in the hour before I came here. So our paper has been presented at the CPCA board in January in relation to a proposed programme delay to the LTCP consultation. Following the success of the soft launch engagement and allied extensive engagement, and I say success because of the amount of feedback we got, which was so, to some point, overwhelming, but very much welcomed within the Combined Authority, that we spoke with elected members and officer groups and across all the constituent parts, as well as going out to the public. We have judged that the magnitude of those comments provided suggests that the requirement for a rewrite rather than the refresh that was originally envisaged. So as a result, we are recommending that the 12-week consultation period required, and because that would then fall across a pre-election period, and And during that pre-election period, we will take the opportunity to work on refining and developing further the consultation materials such that we are ready to be deployed on and around the 10th of May.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, thank you very much. That's a very helpful response. And yes, I put my question in before the publication of the Combined Authority papers. So the sort of thinking about the timings of things, that would imply that the adoption of the local transport connectivity plan will happen by the end of this calendar year at the earliest. And as you know, there's a number of ongoing projects, very important ones for the region, of which the LTP provides a vital policy framework, ensuring that they're coordinated, integrated, and in particular allowing other activities to proceed, such as the delivery of housing by the local planning authorities, the delivery of schemes by the Greater Cambridge Partnership. So it is obviously crucial that the delays in the adoption of the LTP are minimised and that any impacts are limited. I did therefore want to sort of ask about what we can do to ensure that things happen as fast as they possibly can in this situation, and also that the other things are not delayed. Firstly, we discussed at this committee on a number of occasions about the engagement with constituent councils on the local transport plan. So I do want to sort of emphasise and ask whether you would be able to engage well before any consultation periods. I mean, as early as possible, more widely than just simply the leaders, with the councils about the direction of the local transport plan. And secondly, there's a bit of a precedent of using interim transport statements, interim transport policies, I can't remember the exact term, that could be an option for over the next few months, putting in place policies that do allow other projects to proceed. Is that something that you would be able to consider? Thank you.
Well, it's certainly fair to say that, you know, look, I'm as frustrated by kind of the restrictions around pre-elections, and I'm very keen to move on as quickly as possible. But at the same time, I recognised the importance of getting this right. And I mean, what I mean by getting right, it's not just listening to people, it's actually embedding a sense that this is something to do with not just local transport, but local transport and connectivity plan, and how we have, as a society, changed in terms of our perception of the sort of lives that we want to lead, changes to the way that we want to commute. And then, you know, and how we want to build on our communities, and how with the enhancement of an acknowledgement that digital connectivity is just as important to the transport ask, that we need to say, get it right. I guess by having to take on the delay and before going out in May, I'm aware that personal conversations directly with the important people, CEOs, and at GCP level has kind of offered some reassurance that we are aligning well. And again, I speak very positively about those working relationships at officer and director level between the GCP and the Combined Authority. But also I think it's important to, as you've alluded to make sure that we remain in consultation with constituent councils and their leaders. And possibly by this sort of 3 months kind of putback, we now gives us a further opportunity. And maybe if at this point would be allowed to bring in Roland Potter to see if he could offer any much further reassurance about how we are going to keep building on that important sounding of cooperation. Roland, if that's okay with Councillor Dupre.
Yes, of course. Roland.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Van der Veer. I would like to say that the current local transport plan is still a legitimate document to be relied on until such time as the new rewritten plan is endorsed. So that is still a document that can support the programme of works that people are endeavouring to do. The rewrite will bring some proposed changes of modal importance and other things that have come in through the consultation. I would equally like to add to that Mayor has said in terms of the engagement with local elected members, CEOs, leaders, etc., on this local transport and connectivity plan refresh has been so in-depth and detailed, and opportunities, and there will be a programme going forwards for that to continue, more so than I think the Combined Authority has done on any other previous consultation. And it is a result of that it becomes a rewrite as opposed to a refresh. And it's important that the consultation that we undertake is meaningful and has the opportunity for elected members to be able to participate in a meaningful manner. And that's one of the reasons of not doing it through a pre-election period and proposing to postpone it to the first opportunity post-election.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you all. Councillor Corney, next question.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor Nick.
Morning, Councillor Steve.
Firstly, apologies for the question and the format. Really, the email got sent to the post to a polished question, but I think you get the gist of it from there. That the intrigued to know about the Ting and any progress on that. I know it's obviously going to be released. That there's a date for it to be sort of, you know, the timing of it also be, you know, the trial. But is there any early indications of whether it's one bit, you know, what usage you're getting, and whether it's going to be looking like to be viable?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked the question. No matter how it got there, if I get an opportunity to talk about the Ting, I'm going to be happy. So as you can probably tell, I'm very proud of the Combined Authorities Ting trial. And I've had the pleasure of riding on it myself, and all the indicators to date is that it is proving popular amongst a wide, and this is important, a wide spectrum of users, young, older, and indeed business commuters. The trial is itself scheduled to report progress shortly, and then again at the end, and a market research study will be undertaken to add to the data outputs. We are so encouraged, though, that we see a mobility as a service platform region-wide as a next step, ultimately delivering seamless ticketing, journey planning, affordable and reliable connective travel across all modes of transport as our future in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. I hope that gives a sense of how optimistic the initial figures are. And I have to say, it would be a personal thank you to the people of West Huntingdonshire who have been willing to buy into it. And although there is sometimes a sense of it'll never work, my sense is that the good people of Saltrey, St Neots, and those to the west of the A1 that are still in Huntingdonshire should be very proud of how they're adopting the Ting, and dare I say it, trailblazing.
Thank you. It sounds, you know, it sounds promising. Then, so would it be right to say that from that, then it does sound like it's going to be a viable platform, and then rather than going to trial anywhere else, is it likely to go straight out across the county? I know you met with the good people of the Ramsey Neighbourhood Trust only a couple of weeks ago that worked really hard, and they're going to be just one of any number of groups across the county that are doing the same, you know, sort of trying to help their communities, and we'll work with them. They'll be eager to know that, you know, what route to take themselves, I guess.
Well, as I'm sure you'll understand, we've got to go. There's a sense of due process, and that, you know, I think it probably comes across that as the mayor, I'm very much an advocate for this answer, and I come from a position of trying to initially understand the concept and having some degree of scepticism. The final decision obviously sits with the board, and it is true that my visits to Ramsey, as much as some of the visits to the towns of East Cambridgeshire, or indeed the Fenland region, I do offer this up as a positive that I think is coming to all areas. Again, I might introduce Roland here, kind of understand how the possibility of this rolling out is seen in the initial discussions that we've had. But I think we have to be, you know, we have to follow due process, and we have to not just convince the mayor, we have to convince the board, and then in the course of time, working on the positives that we're getting from West Huntingdonshire, we have to be able to, if we are going to drop these sorts of ambitious services into a local area, we need to get the buy-in. I absolutely recognise Ramsey is an area that would benefit, but if we can do it straight away, or how long it'll take, possibly Roland might take me back from my overly optimistic cups half full approach. Roland, can you give if that's okay with Councillor Dupre?
Yep, Roland?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Corney. I would say that, like the Mayor, like others, software as a service, mobility as a service are all evolving and developing things. And I'm very proud that we took the leap forwards with the Ting, and I'm very proud of the delivery of it. Equally, within our bus service improvement plan, we insisted that despite it being in trial, that we actually put in the proposal of the bus service improvement plan this type of service across the entire region. So within the graphics within the bus service improvement plan, they're all coloured. Every district is considered for a service of this nature, and the learning will come from the Ting delivery, and we will need to consider the geographic, demographic, topographical challenges that our various districts have differently to ensure that we can implement something of this nature. Whether we're able to do it in a here we go, cover the whole region, or whether it is done in a phased rollout, we're still working up, and we'll have to make decisions, and some of that will be based around funding, and some of that will be around operator availability and interest, etc., and there'll be tendering processes. But I am confident that this type of service will form part of our overall integrated public transport service that provides a better connectivity with a first mile, last mile, a demand potential into direct timetable services, whether that be bus or whether that be rail, to enable rural occupants that currently don't have connectivity, as well as others, connectivity to villages, to market towns, to cities with cross-city solutions. And following on from the previous question, we're working in collaboration with Greater Cambridge Partnership and their proposals on city access and others, and what that looks like, and how this could support in that as well. So it's one element of an overall integrated public transport solution, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much.
Just say thank you both.
Thank you. Before you leave us, Mayor and Roland, there was one question which was apparently submitted to this process but didn't make it quite as far as yourselves, or indeed myself. And I'm wondering whether I could ask you whether you would consider giving an answer, even if it's just a holding answer. And I'm asking that partly because of a failure of process, for which I apologise, but also because it follows on from a question that was asked of you, Mayor, the last time you joined us, which was physically and in this building. And it relates to e-scooters. And I'm wondering, it was Councillor Miscandlin who raised it, and I'm wondering whether Councillor Miscandlin would like to ask his question, subject to you being willing to entertain it. Would you be willing to accept that question?
As I've always said, Councillor Dupre, to the whole of the overview and scrutiny, I want to be as open and helpful as possible. I apologise now if I give a holding answer, but please feel free to go ahead.
Thank you very much. Councillor Miscandlin.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Nick. Some time ago, I asked about e-scooters. Talking to police officers, this has now become a wild west. I was nearly knocked down by an e-scooter in Cambridge, to which the rider of it turned around and swore at me because I had the audacity to walk on the pavement. It seems like it's a wild west show. There is no regulation. I accept that you're doing a study in Cambridge with licensed vehicles, but there are too many unlicensed vehicles going too fast on pavements with no protection for the riders, the public. There has been a number of deaths throughout the country and numerous injuries with these unregulated vehicles. Now, I know it's not your authority to do this, but I think you need to talk to the police about it, about controlling this, because in their words, it's become a Wild West show, and more people are going to get killed and injured, and you'll be seeing them at your hospital. So I think that needs to either be suspended for the time being while regulations are put in place so that these vehicles are regulated. They have no registration, no insurance, no protective riding gear. And I think this is wrong. I think it's been too soon to allow this to go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'll come to the Mayor first, and then Roland's also got his hand up.
I can see Roland. I mean, I think it's safe to say that this is something that has filled the mayoral office inbox with some significant numbers, and the concerns expressed from the councillor are ones I share. And I share them particularly because I think the opportunity for e-scooters and e-bikes, which is part of the bigger scheme, is something that actually, when it's done well, it can actually be of great benefit to the community. But the fact that I wouldn't use the phrase that you've referred to, that the Wild West, it would be a great shame if the behaviours of a few, or maybe more than a few, are actually damaging opportunities that are there for the whole of the community. So you're absolutely right that we need to work with the police and the Police and Crime Commissioner. It is something that I think we probably need a more considered response, but having taken on that challenge and wanting to make the world and come up with better answers around integrated travel solutions, I'm grateful if Roland wants to kind of give a more nuanced response to kind of what we have done in terms of taking on the challenge. And just one final point, I have visited Voi, who are obviously the company who have taken on the responsibility for the trial within our local area. I do believe that they have gone to some significant lengths to deal with the issue in terms of any antisocial behaviours related to their own scooters. But I think what you've highlighted is the fact that these are an increasingly popular choice of travel, but if they're not regulated and they are not necessarily linked in with the official scheme, they are posing a problem to us all. Is it okay if I now defer to Roland for a more nuanced response, and then we make it?
Yes, of course. Yes, Roland.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Scanlon. I recognise the commentary made, and we do have this challenge of regulated and unregulated, and the trial that we've had ongoing is regulated. They do have to provide photographic evidence of their driving licence to register, and they are licensed and insured e-scooters. Now, that doesn't mean to say there won't be poor behaviour, and there is sometimes poor behaviour, but we can at least identify the individual that's rented the scooter for the time that poor behaviour may well have happened, and it can be reported and subsequently dealt with. The point of the trial, from my perspective and from the combined authorities' perspective, is to provide and assist the Department of Transport in the collation of evidence that allows the consideration of regulation of this form of transport on the highway. The Voi scooter trial is meant to be on the highway, not on the pedestrian way. So there is a proposal that will come forward to the board in March for the DFT have proposed extending these sort of trials to November to provide additional depth and breadth of quality data before they then finally make their decision. But it is a challenge of running a regulated service when there is an unregulated use of these scooters being purchased when they should only be used on private land, and they are obviously being used in the highway. And yes, that is an enforcement challenge at the moment. But in terms of the trial with Voi e-scooters, I think it is, and it would be my recommendation that we continue with a regulated trial to create the data that can enable some regulation going forwards from the Department of Transport that is then enforceable in a more structured way than perhaps currently happens. So I'll step back there.
Thank you very much indeed. Did you want a supplementary?
I fully accept that the trial is important, and in certain circumstances, e-scooters are a solution to it. But you're quite right, Roland. It's the few that are messing out, or not so many few. It's a lot more than that are messing it up for the regulated ones. It's the unregulated scooters which are now being advertised of up to 70 miles an hour. And there are actually videos of these travelling on motorways. So I think there needs to be a grip got on this before it gets totally out of hand and you've got 70-mile-an-hour scooters going through the city and other towns. And it must be made clear to the public that this regulated trial is carried out in Cambridge only. Now, all the other cities, Peterborough, the towns of Whittlesea, March, Chatteris, they've all got these youngsters as young as 12 riding e-scooters on pavements in the dark. But you're quite right, this is a regulatory thing that has to be dealt with by the police. And I think the CPCA should contact the police in terms of, we've got a regulated trial in Cambridge, elsewhere, they're illegal. Can you please do something about it? Because it's falling on deaf ears. And I'd hate to have to attend a few funerals.
Okay, point taken, I think, unless the Mayor has anything to add. Yeah.
Well, I'll take that as an action point along with Roland to kind of get an update. I mean, this is not something that we haven't been in contact with about, but we'll send a note to local law enforcement and indeed Darryl Preston in terms of the Police and Crime Commissioner, seeing where we're at and reiterating the concerns that have obviously come from the overview and scrutiny, which is there to challenge. And I accept that challenge, and I will take that also as a challenge to myself, but also to the enforcement authorities.
Thank you very much indeed, Mayor. We've already craved your indulgence with asking an unnotified question, and we run a fairly tight ship here, and I know there are one or two other members who would have liked to have commented on this. I'm not going to permit that. The supplementary questions are for the people who ask the questions only, but I do want to find other ways in which members who have an interest in this can continue to make their views known and interact with the authority as this all progresses. So thank you very much indeed, Mayor, for your attendance. Thank you, Roland, also, and that's been most helpful. So look forward to seeing you at a future date. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, we're now going to move on to item 6, which is the draft Sustainable Growth Ambition Statement on the 2022 to 2023 draft budget and the medium-term financial plan 2022 to 2026. We will have with us John Alsop and Paul Rains, who are now both with us already, to present their report on Zoom, and we are being asked to note the responses to the consultation on those documents, and also to note the responses to the questions and comments that we put forward at our last meeting where this was discussed. So I'm going to hand over now to John and Paul to tell us what they want to tell us before we move to discussion.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, members. As you just mentioned, members hopefully will recall that we had 2 sessions held with the committee in December, a workshop and a committee meeting, to go through the draft Sustainable Growth Ambition Statement and the draft budget for 2022-23 and the medium-term financial plan as part of the consultation process. There are a number of questions that were raised at the committee meeting on the 13th of December by members, and responses to those questions have been provided. They're shown at Appendix 1. The paper also provides a summary of the wider consultation responses that were received, some directly and through a dedicated microsite that was set up specifically to receive responses from the public during the consultation process, which ran until the 31st of December 2021. There were 30 responses to the online consultation, 27 from Cambridgeshire and Peterborough residents, some from business owners, some from elected councillors, and from parish councillors or clerks. And there is a summary of the responses to the growth and ambition statement relating to the importance of the themes as set out in the statement, and that is shown in a table under paragraph 2.9. And under paragraph 2.10, we have a summary of the types of comments that were raised under each of the 6 themes, and more detailed versions of the responses themselves are shown under Appendix 2. We had 174 direct email messages received on behalf of 180 individuals requesting that the strategic outline business plan for Whittlesea Southern Relief Road be included in the combined authorities budget. And also there was a separate discussion held with the business board as another named consultee in the constitution. Those discussions focused more on the strategic aspects of the growth ambition statement and how these might be interpreted by business. And the business board called for a subsequent meeting with the combined authority board to exchange views around growth and skills and against the backdrop of the developing economic growth strategy. Just to provide an update on the draft budget since the version that was provided on and approved by the board for consultation purposes back in November. It has been updated, and the version will be going to the board for approval and discussion on Wednesday, but it's been updated to take account of subsequent government and board decisions. It also includes an additional £1 million of mayoral capacity fund revenue funding that we're expecting from central government. There's an additional £200,000 provision, a capital provision for expected fit out costs, which are expected for new accommodation in the new financial year. And it also includes an additional £9.8 million of potential capital projects and 1.3 million of potential revenue projects, which have been put forward as potential subject to approval budget lines following a development of a pipeline of projects exercise which has taken place with leaders and constituent councils, and which was scored against the 6 themes of the growth ambition statement. Only non-transport and non-business and skills projects were considered and scored at this time, but headroom has been built into or left in the budget and Mtfp until such time as the transport and business and skills pipeline of projects can be considered when the transport and economic and skills strategy are more fully developed. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, John. I was going to ask Paul whether he had anything to add, but Paul's screen appears to have frozen. I'm not sure whether he can hear us. Can you hear us, Paul?
I can, if you can hear me, Chair.
Right. I don't think that's how it works, but we can hear you, yes. So I wondered whether you might want to switch your camera off in order to improve connectivity.
I've taken the camera off. Does that help?
It sort of helps, but it means we can now, I can't even see that you're there on the screen. There isn't even a black box, which is rather odd, but I will have to take it on trust that you're there. Do you have anything to add to what John has said before I move into questions and then discussion?
So as a matter of fact, Chair, I don't. I think John's covered it, so just happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Members, I'm going to start by asking whether anybody has any questions for either John or Paul, and could you indicate who you're directing the question to if you're sure that you know. I'm going to start with Councillor Davey and then Councillor Atkins.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if it's John or Paul, actually, so forgive me, but it's relating to the bidding process that took place that John referred to at the end of his presentation. That took place, I have to say, although the note in the board says November and December, that's not quite what it felt like in the authorities that put bids in. It'd be fair to say we only really found out at the beginning of December, and there was a bit of a rush to get it right. Whilst I don't want to be churlish, because I do welcome the release of the funds, and that would be wrong to give a different impression, but I do wonder if the process might be sharpened up. Now we're into the next stage. It would be fair to say that in the recipient authorities, it was quite difficult to work out how much, when, why, and I know there was clarification emails, but then again, the funding that was available seemed to change again after January the 1st. And I suppose the plea is that for the next stages, if we could have clarity about the process, and that goes not just to the members, but also to the local authority chief execs, that'd be really welcome, because then there was a difficulty at our end again of trying to ensure who knew what, when and where. And I think whilst we got there in the end, and as I say, I don't want to be churlish because I do welcome the opening up, but nonetheless, if the future stages of the bidding process could be more clear and more transparent, that'd be really helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is one of you going to be in a position to take that, John, Paul?
Well, obviously we've kind of note the comments, and welcome the comments, and members will appreciate that we haven't done this sort of process before. We did take a number of papers to members as part of the leader strategy discussions. So the process has developed. I think it's good to hear that you said that we've kind of got there in the end, but absolutely we need to learn from what's happened, the process, and yes, we can absolutely develop this further and provide the right sort of support. I know that there has been a dedicated resource which has been made available to constituent councils from Paul's team, but yes, we can certainly look to improve it for the process going forward and for future years.
Yeah, and perhaps just to add to that, I think that it's very, very useful to get this kind of feedback. We are obviously, as John says, this is the first time we've done something like this, which was based on an open bidding process on scoring against policy priorities. But clearly, as you make progress and you make improvements, you can always make more improvements. So really happy to take the point on board. I should just report back that what did come in from constituent authorities was really of very good quality. You know, they're really good bids, well written. People are clear about what they're trying to achieve, and so there have been some very good conversations on the back of that.
Thank you. Councillor Davey, there's no obligation to ask a supplementary question, but if you would like to, that's
a brief comment just to say, again, I would hate my comments to be misrepresented, and considerable thanks are due to Mike Soper for his support. I know the officers in particular welcome that at the City Council. So if that gratitude can be passed back to him, I'd be really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, no, Mike's been a big star in this process.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Atkins.
Thank you. Following on from Councillor Davies' comments, I want to stay with the kind of the new projects identified. I wasn't involved in any part of the bidding process, so it's a little opaque to me precisely what has taken place. Am I correct in understanding that no part of this has been subject to consultation, either with any part of the kind of combined authority or with the public, and that this has all taken place kind of whilst the consultation was ongoing, and therefore it has not been consulted on in any meaningful sense?
That's correct. So this process was so the consultation process was just in terms of the draft Sustainable Growth Ambition Statement, but also in the draft budget and medium-term financial plan that was approved for consultation by the board back in November. So you're right to say that a lot of the work that has developed in terms of the project prioritisation process has happened in parallel to that process.
Yes, I mean, I think, as Councillor Davis said, there's only so much we can do in terms of the process this year, but it does feel to me as if the budget that we're looking at now is already very substantially different from the budget that we looked at in November, and indeed has gone to public consultation, which makes me wonder why we bothered going to consultation in November when, and looking at the projects, there's lots of fascinating and worthwhile and interesting things, which I think the public might have wanted a say on. A lot of these schemes would have been close to people's hearts. And, I think they would have valued an opportunity to express that view. I wonder that there's been various discussion of a kind of a midterm refresh. I wonder if any further thought has been given to how and when the public might take a view or express a view even on any of this work.
John, shall I just come in there? It may be worth understanding exactly what these papers are proposing. So this is the allocation of funding within the Mtfp that will be subject to approval. And in order to obtain the approval to spend, the projects will need to bring forward business cases. And as you know, consultation is very often a part of the way in which business cases are developed. So just this allocation of a budget envelope subject to approval in the Mtfp is far from being the end of the story in terms of the way the individual projects will then be taken forward.
Certainly, thank you, Paul. I appreciate that, but equally, I mean, looking at the figures that are going to the board on Wednesday, I think if I'm correct, as of the 1st of April, there will be in the region of £65 million sitting in the capital pot, of which less than a tenth is approved for expenditure in the next year. That makes it quite difficult. In addition to the schemes individually, I think there is a role for both us and the public to have a view on the budget as a whole about where and how and at what times money is being spent. And at the moment, it feels, this may be a personal view, and I will cede the floor in a second, sorry, but it feels to me like we're still not grappling with something that's particularly definite, and where large amounts of money are still being sort of hypothecated or allocated in a way that's not totally clear.
Thank you. Yes, I mean it is obviously the reasons for having headroom in the Mtfp is because we are waiting for the relevant strategies to be developed, and it's important that the budget is constructed on the policy framework and the strategies. And obviously, as Paul said, there is the assurance process that we need to follow in terms of development of the business cases and for projects that are within the Mtfp as subject to approval by the board. We have in previous years had mid-year refreshers. We haven't gone out to consultation on those, but there's nothing to stop us from doing that if the board decide that that's something that they want to go with. So yes, we can certainly have that conversation with the board.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. Is it working? Yes. It's more of a comment really than a question, and it may be unfair for John or Paul to answer it. But sharing the concerns of Councillor Atkins and Davey, I think that there's so little substance in the budget, and it is concerning that it's changed so much. And we talk about strategies being developed, but it will be, we've heard earlier, the transport plan will probably be in place nearly 2 years after the election. So I've got grave concerns over the way it's being pulled together in terms of there's nothing really to question on a lot of this, because it's just sitting in money on hold, waiting bids. So yeah, I have grave concerns.
Okay, thank you. John, Paul, is it unfair to ask you to comment as Councillor Sharp suggested it might be, or would you want to venture a response? I leave it to you.
Well, should I just? I mean, maybe there are some points to make in response to that. I mean, we're clearly going through a sequenced process that is in accordance with the combined authorities' key governance documents, including the assurance framework. So we're making a budget and allocating funding to projects through this Mtfp, but within the assurance framework, we cannot, or the combined author board cannot release funding against projects until a business case is brought forward that demonstrates value for money, and the process around that is tightly. It's important to remember that what we're dealing with here is money that's been voted by Parliament. So the process is different than the process you would get in a council. So clearly there are at each step of the process, the degree of visibility goes up, the degree of detail. So at this point, you've not got all the very elaborate arithmetic that you will get when things get to a business case stage. But I can understand that members looking at this, want to know what's coming next, want to know more detail. But we are constrained by a governance framework that requires us to take things in stages.
Would also perhaps just come in there, just to say that that it's always been the case. I mean, members will be aware that a lot of our funding, especially in the early days of the combined authority, was received in advance, and we always have held at the end of each financial year balances which hadn't been allocated either to approved projects or subject to approve for projects. I think it's probably a bit more this time round than in previous years, but it's certainly not a kind of a new situation for the combined authority.
Okay, thank you. That kind of leads on to a couple of questions I had. The first one was going back to the question of consultation. We commented last time about needing to reflect how the public will be consulted with the lack of detail in the allocation of available balances. And the response that we have in front of us is that there is the potential to consult with the public when the budget is refreshed mid-year. I noted also that in response to a question this morning, it was stated that consultation is very often part of business cases. Neither of those statements actually says there will be public consultation, and I wondered whether you were now in a position to be a bit more definitive about that, and if you're not in a position to be definitive about that, when you will be able to be definitive.
Can we take that question away? I'd quite like to talk to our colleagues in legal and governance to ask about what needs to happen in terms of making that decision. I don't know if Paul's got any alternative thoughts.
No, I'm happy with that, John. Maybe just as a reflection, clearly where there isn't a prescription, a legal obligation, discretion will rest with the board, and as officers, some of our drafting is designed to protect the discretion of elected members who need to tell us what they want to do at some point.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy for you to take that away as long as you bring it back again. And my other question was, we asked about the £500,000 that is still in the budget for the housing team, and whether, given the potentially very much reduced role for the combined authority in housing, although I appreciate that that is up for debate by the board, we're told that when the combined authority receives greater clarity, it will be looking at resourcing and staffing. I was wondering when we could expect that greater clarity. So it's a kind of a similar question.
Yes, so the combined authority at the moment is looking towards the future of the organisation and what resourcing requirements will need to be in place. I think it's fairly early days at the moment, but we'll bring that back to the committee when we've got greater visibility of the outcome of that piece of work.
Thank you. So are we talking 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? What are we talking about broadly?
Again, I think we'll probably need to come back to you. It's with the processes of with other people at the moment, so it's probably best for us to come back to you with an answer to that question.
Thank you. So that's 2 things to take away and bring back. Are there any other questions from members for John and Paul? No further questions, in which case is there anything you wish to state or debate on this item, members? Not seeing any hands, so thank you, members, for your questions. Thank you, John and Paul, very much for your attendance and your responses. So very grateful to you for doing that this morning. Thank you. So we note the responses to the consultation and the responses to the questions then. Our next item is item 7, which is the accommodation strategy. And I see we've been joined by Nick Sweeney, Residential Development Manager, via Zoom, and also by John Hill, who is now, I think, just John Hill, not John T. Hill anymore. Thank you for joining us. We also have the original paper from Councillor Goldsack on this item. I don't know, Councillor Goldsack, whether there's anything you wanted to say on that, or whether you're happy for me simply to go straight to Nick and John for their...
Very happy for you to go straight to the officers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nick, John, is there anything you would like to tell us about this accommodation strategy paper before I move to members for question and comment?
Well, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nick Sweeney, Residential Development Manager. I've been asked to brief Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the current situation in respect of identifying an office accommodation solution for the Combined Authority. At a leaders strategy meeting on the 8th of December, an accommodation strategy and options appraisal process were discussed and approved. We were then asked to shortlist the 2 highest scoring options for further investigation and more detailed consideration before identifying a preferred option. You have a copy of the strategy document as an appendix, so I'll now explain the approach that was adopted. An officer working group was established that was chaired by Director John Hill, who's on the call. We then identified principal factors to consider throughout the identification and selection process. Now, these principal factors are quite important. These were staff consideration. A staff survey was undertaken in September to establish preferences and to help identify how employees might use an office. This identified that staff don't envisage sitting behind a desk, as they can do this at home, and the office was viewed as a place to meet, communicate and collaborate. It seemed reasonable to assume a generic attendance rate of 2 days per week in the office, so we adopted a 40% occupancy ratio, which approximately translates to 40 staff in attendance at most times. The staff's preferred location was the A1 corridor. Tenure. The officer working group adopted a working assumption that a medium-term solution would be suitable, so a 5-year lease would be adequate. This also suits the potential options that were identified. The physical attributes are an important factor. The size, a large range was identified between 465 square metres and 750 square metres. The layout has to offer versatility and breakout space, not just a room with desks. Facilities, there has to be good information technology and a kitchen or refectory facility. Energy efficiency was considered vital. It was an important factor as this Combined Authority has adopted Climate Commission recommendations. Accessibility, very important. It has to be convenient for public transport with some access to car parking. Another important factor is cost, of course. There's an obvious requirement to ensure we pay an appropriate cost. Availability, a target date for operational occupation was identified as April 2022. And what additional benefits there will be. There are obvious benefits in co-locating and sharing facilities with other like-minded organisations. So having identified those principal factors, the next stage was to identify some accommodation options. So a brief was prepared detailing criteria, and this was circulated to Cambridgeshire One Public Estates. Now, this group includes property representatives from all public sector organisations across the region, and not just councils. 6 potential options were then suggested by members of the Cambridgeshire One Public Estate Network, and these were shown in the matrix on page 23 of your pack. So the next stage was to assess how each of these potential options fared against the principal factors that I've explained before. So members of the officer working group were nominated to attribute scores. It was then necessary to apply weightings to each of the scores to reflect the fact that some criteria was more important. For example, a couple of months delayed availability is not as important as an accessible location, so those factors should not be assessed equally. The officer working group, along with representatives of the staff forum, then met up to consider the scores and apply the weightings. The results were then entered into the matrix, and the highest scoring options identified were part of Pathfinder House in Huntingdon and part of San Martin House in Peterborough. Leaders agreed we should assess these 2 options in more detail. So I've subsequently appointed Portsdown consultants who advised the County Council on the new Shire Hall, and also Huntingdonshire District Council on configuring layouts within Pathfinder House. And this morning we met with the executive team to work through in more detail how the office would function in order to more clearly define our requirement. Portsdown will now go away and design some test fits of how our requirements may be accommodated within Pathfinder House and San Martin House. This will provide the footprint of what we need and enable us to negotiate lease terms in more detail. We can then provide the appropriate information for decision makers to identify a preferred option. So that's where we are with it, and either myself or Director John Hill will be happy to take questions from you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. John, did you have anything to add, or are you happy for us to move directly to questions?
Please move directly to questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Goldsack.
Good morning, John. Good morning, Nick. Thank you for your report. Just one thing, just to be absolutely clear. You mentioned the terms of the extended lease on Market Street for the Mayor's office. It doesn't categorically say whether they and their staff are part of the accommodation review and would be part of the entity that you're moving into an agreement with. Can you just confirm that one way or another, or tell us what the situation is, please?
I can confirm the current contractual situation, Councillor Goldsack. There's a 12-month lease commenced on the 1st of January 2022, and that will terminate at the end of the calendar year. And there is provision to end that lease as from June, 30th of June this year at 6-month interval and thereafter. A decision as to the future of retaining or disposing of that assets has yet to be concluded. So I think that's all I can say at the moment. There's no decision being made, and we're currently awaiting decision.
Thank you. Councillor Davey.
Yes. Going back to the choice of the 2, because unless I've missed it, has that just been announced just now? It's the first time we've known it's Pathfinder or the Pro San Martin House, because unless I've missed it in the documentation, I didn't see that before. No. So I'd like some clarity really about the main purpose of where the accommodation should be. Is it about locating staff, or is it about having a location that would be suitable for people having meetings and the like? I've seen the accommodation appraisal matrix, but I have to say that bearing in mind, if it does include having and holding meetings, I'm struggling to understand why Fenland Hall hasn't been included in that last duo. And I say this as a Cambridge City Councillor. I'm not advocating for something in the city, but in terms of public transport and accessibility, unless there's other things within the accommodation option appraisal, Fenland Hall's difficult to beat, I find. And the minute you go into San Martin House and Huntingdon, whilst I do appreciate that the Huntingdon offices are close to a station. It's a devil to get to from Cambridge, but I suspect people from Huntingdon would probably say the same going the other way around. And as for the Peterborough office, that's not close to the station, because if Dave and I go to Peterborough, we have to then get a taxi from the station to the office. So I'm struggling a little bit with how those two became the top two. And if you could explain, I'm sure there's a reason for it, but if you could explain something about that, that'd be really helpful. Thank you very much, both.
I'll go first, John, if you like. Thanks for your comments. The officer working group did consider location. If that's specifically one critical factor that concerns you, public transport accessibility was a scored factor. I think going through the scores, I mean, I'm quite happy to share the matrix with you if you'd like, of how the officer working group determined and finalised the scores. But going through the items, Fenland Hall didn't actually score very well on public transport accessibility. We do know that Fenland Hall in March does have a railway station in close proximity, but that's about it really. If you were to consider that, say, against Huntingdon, which has the guided bus, the normal bus services, the train station, the A14, the new A14 links, the A1 proximity, and then you consider that with Peterborough, it's got bus services, train station, and that's accessible from the main arterial trunk roads. I think Fenland Hall, being out on the periphery of the county on the east, is quite remote. The only good thing it's got for it is a train station, and I think that was the view adopted by the officer working group that was recorded on the scoring matrix. So it didn't score very well in terms of public transport accessibility. You're welcome to your own view on that, but that was the view adopted by officers.
Respond to that, Nick's comments.
Yes, please do.
Nick, would you like to tell me where you think the centre of the county is?
I think the centre of the county is Huntingdon.
Well, yeah, I thought that might be the case. I think it's Pidley, or somewhere between Pidley and Maney. I think my concern is when you say about transport, so my experience as someone coming from Cambridge, an hour and a half on the guided bus from Cambridge to Huntingdon, and that's the usual, the average, because I've had to do it on many occasions, whereas it's half an hour on the train to March. And I think I can't quite follow there. Maybe I thought you were going to tell me about Fenland Hall was not useful for other reasons, but in terms of transport and accessibility, I have to say, on a personal level, I have to disagree with you. And that's somebody who's been working in the county for 20 years. But I'd like to see the data, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite happy. I could share that with you now if you like, on the screen. But in terms of Fenland Hall, I can run through that. It wasn't actually big enough. So it didn't score very well at all there. The accommodation that was they had available wasn't very it wasn't very big, and it was also you couldn't really modify it because of the construction of the building. It's solid walls and it's a cellular layout.
Nick, that's the answer that I can understand. But that's not what you just said.
No, I thought you were focusing on location, but no, there were multiple factors. That were all the working group attributed scores, and then they were weighted. I'm quite happy to share that with you.
Maybe not for the meeting, but please,
Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear if you could send that out. That'd be fantastic. Thank you, Nick.
Yes, I think we would like to see that. John, you were wanting to come in.
Indeed, Chair. I was going to suggest that to solve this particular debate, the simplest thing to do would indeed to be able to share the matrix, and then officers can also answer questions on why it was scored that way. But one point I would make is that it was an officer group. We then had staff representation within it, and then we presented it to leaders, and they ratified the scores as well. And some of the leaders asked us to vary some of the weightings to see if the result would be different. And we did, and it wasn't.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Coles is next.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation, Nick. Very, very interesting to see how you've come to the final two. I suppose my question is related to our current experiences of staff working from home, and I know you're working on a 40% occupancy rate for the staff. Is there an argument to say that you could also be considering a split site rather than one location?
Well, they're not at this stage. I suppose we were just, my brief was just to focus on a new corporate sort of office, and satellite offices did not form part of this exercise.
If I could intervene. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Around 9 months to a year ago, we did in fact, when we were considering 100 people before remote working really took a hold, we were actually thinking of a hub with some county spokes to it. But then once remote working in the pandemic, encouraging remote working really took hold culturally and sort of in productivity sense, we sort of moved towards a concept that we wouldn't really get an office for 100 people, central or distributed. And once we'd gone down to 40, then we felt that the hub and spoke concept fell away a little bit because we were talking about smaller numbers.
Okay, thank you very
Thank you.
much.
It makes ideal sense. I think it's just my concern for members trying to appear to meetings, and you've heard the issues that Councillor Davies very ably explained, that maybe for us it's easier not to go to one location, and if in your plans it was decided that meeting such as this could still appear right the way around the area or in a particularly more convenient location, that would be part of your consideration, or are you planning for everything to stay in one site?
I can probably answer that, Nick. Of course, right now, and indeed before we lost our office, meetings were revolved around the county for exactly the reason that you're saying. So that may well still be the case, certainly depending on which premises that we finally decide on, and what central meeting facilities they've got. But I think it's still yet to be decided, and probably a decision for politicians around where meetings take place and whether to retain the concept of a central office, but political meetings and committee meetings being distributed on a rota basis, as was the case.
Thank you. Councillor Dew.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of it's been covered off now. I was going to say it would be useful if the grid had been shared in advance, because you know, I do share the slight problems. I can't think of my word now. The problems that we have with just trying to do it on geographical count, especially when we all do it focus, unfortunately, in my opinion, on our own problems that we have getting to and from. And I appreciate the Cambridge members and the fact they like to travel by train and to get here, and I'd like to do the same, and it doesn't work for all of us all the while, and that's the problem. So obviously that sort of gridding would have helped, because as members, and I've said before, in the village I live in, if I want to come by public transport, if I'm prepared to leave on a Monday and come back on a Friday, I can go anywhere in the county, but other than that there isn't any. So you know, we've all got to work within it, but the grid would have been useful, so the fact you're prepared to share that with us, we'll take it forward, and I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hay.
I'd just like to understand how the decision came to base it on a 40% occupancy, which is basically 2 days a week in the office, 3 from home, which, particularly when you've got new members of staff, working with fellow colleagues is a very important part of getting into the role. I just feel that 40% is too low.
Well, I can try and add comment to that. So I suppose when you're out there looking and trying to explain to people what your requirement is, you have to sort of indicate an area. Now, clearly, it's not cost effective to have a huge, great office that could maybe accommodate the full staff capacity and possibly public meetings as well. And then to find that there's only a small number of staff in attendance at any one time, and I think that's common across the public sector. I mean, the county council at the new Shire Hall, I think they've gone on less of a ratio than 40%, and that actually changed during the pandemic. So it is a flexible thing, and it just provides us with an indication. I mean, nothing is set in stone. I think the consultants who I've appointed to sort of come up with designs and layouts and test fits to fit within the two options have been, you know, they're trying to sort of say, well, you know, we'll have this number of desks, this number of breakout spaces. But also it's interesting to know, I know where you're coming from with this, and it is an important factor for the combined authority to have all staff meetings and public meetings. And it's interesting to note that both facilities, Pathfinder House at Huntingdon has a civic suite available, which, and a part of my negotiations, I'm trying to factor in the availability to book that separately so that the combined authority doesn't accrue the entire costs of leasing it full time, but there it's available for congregation events and public meetings. And similarly at St Martin House in Peterborough, they have lots of space available and they have their own council meetings as well. And so what I'm trying to negotiate is not only the lease exclusively for the combined authorities use, but also a side facility whereby we can say, well, actually, could our democratic services people work with yours, and can we diary manage it so that we make the most effective use of the public sector assets available to us, rather than duplicating unnecessary space that isn't utilised for the whole of the time. So I take on board your comments, but there are these additional options and benefits which were scored by the group under additional benefits through co-locating with similar like-minded partners. So I think that's how we're accommodating your concerns, Councillor.
Okay, thank you very much. A question from me, if I may, in kind of two stages. The first one is the report that we saw, the document, I can't remember what it was headed, Accommodation Strategy and Options Assessment Process. And you mentioned also in your introduction, Nick, that staff expressed a preference for a location in the A1 corridor. Now, the way that's phrased suggests to me that staff are expecting to drive to work. What information do you have about the proportion of staff that are expecting to drive versus the proportion that are expecting to come via public transport? Because the phrasing of that very much suggests that there is an expectation of use of the private motor vehicle. And related to that, Councillor Goldsack asked about the premises in Market Street in Ely. And you responded in terms of the premises, but not about the people within them. Are there any staff in Ely that are expecting to be retained, and are they expecting to be located in either of the two shortlisted potential accommodations? And how easy is that for them to do, given where they are working at the moment?
Well, I suppose for the first part of your question, within the A1 corridor from St Neots to Peterborough, I think within close proximity to it does imply that a lot of staff do intend to drive. I can see that, you know, I'm not denying that. And when we did have the staff forum on the working group, they were quite clear. A lot of them were quite, you know, clear. Look, we want car parking, and it was quite a sensitive issue. But I suppose it was only one factor amongst many, and you know, we do have to have some car parking availability. I mean, the Pathfinder House doesn't have any on-site provision, and if we went there, then we'd have to perhaps use Huntingdonshire District Council car parks, which are a fair walk away. And similarly at St Martin House, there's a multi-storey on site, but there won't always be spaces within the multi-storey. So I don't really want to get embroiled in a human resources sort of issue about car parking. But, you know, I recall my employment contract, I think, says that I have to be, you know, I can be located at any office within the county and Peterborough. But obviously we can come back to you. But, you know, it's something that I don't feel that staff have a contractual entitlement to. Going to the second point, staff who work in the Ely office at the moment, I think they're on the same contractual terms as I've explained. And without going down, treading on HR's toes. That's my understanding, and we can come back to you with that if it's helpful.
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, I think I'm afraid human resources issues surely are absolutely at the heart of determining an accommodation strategy. But right, okay. Are there any further questions for Nick or John on this? I'm not seeing any hands, so can I ask if there is anybody who wishes to make a comment on this? Councillor Goldsack.
Yeah, just a very quick comment. I mean, I stepped in when we needed a rapporteur for this area and went away and did some work. And quite frankly, I was very pleasantly surprised at how advanced they were in the strategy for this, as opposed to the expectation were that we didn't think we had any ideas of where we were going. So I, for one, am quite pleased to see this today. I totally accept, and I'm sure Nick and John see now, that had we have had the matrix in front of us before today, maybe you would have got a few less questions, but there you go, that's where we're at. I wish you well in completing it, and hope that the 40% moves further north as we move out of what the current conditions are. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Goldsack, and thank you for your work on this. It is certainly fair to say that the invitation to work on the accommodation strategy to this committee was actually made by the then interim chief executive, because we had established through our lines of questioning that there was not an accommodation strategy at the time that invitation was extended. So that this does fill a very important gap, and I think it's been very productive to have the Overview and Scrutiny Committee involved in that, and I'm grateful on our behalf for the invitation that was extended at that time. Thank you very much, Nick and John, for attending today to answer our questions and inform us and keep us up to date. And there are, I think, a number of points on which we have certainly invited further information to come forward, and look forward to receiving that as soon as you are available to do so. So thank you very much indeed, both for your attendance this morning. Thank you. So we now note that committee, and we move on to the forward plan of the combined authority, in which we have a number of lead members allocated to monitor the activities of the combined authority in a number of different areas of its operation. So I'm going to invite each in turn to provide us with an update on any areas of interest within their sphere of responsibility. And I'm going to start with Councillor Bagent in transport.
Thank you, Chair. I have no particular items to raise, except for that I have great concern about the timing of the plan and the extension of the plan.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think we've already covered that within our questioning earlier. Councillor Coles and Councillor Miscandlin have the skills brief.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I was pleased to go to the Skills Committee meeting on the 17th of January and asked a total of 11 questions. I was hoping to be able to circulate that paper to everyone. Unfortunately, they're still working on a couple of the questions. We had another issue, unfortunately, of emails not quite finding their way to everybody. So I'm expecting that by 4 p.m, the questions and answers will be available for download from the site. But if I do get the link, I will circulate it to all through the Scrutiny Committee process here, so you'll get to see it. I don't really want to go into great detail because there were very long answers to very long questions. There were over 500 pages to go through. But what I would say is that I'm satisfied with the majority of the answers that I got, that they were answering the issues that we were covering. I've had a commitment since to have closer working relationship with the officers to make sure that we're not suddenly overloaded with far too many questions on far too many pages to ask with far too little time to do it. So I'm very pleased about that. My final comment was that we were asking quite a lot of questions about community learning and how that works with our skills and efforts to get people into employment. And as a result of our discussion, that Councillor Miscandlin and I have agreed to take on a rapporteur style inquiry into community learning and carry that through. Hopefully I can report that, as I said, in either the March or April meeting.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Miscanlon, did you have anything to add to that summary?
Yeah, I concur with what Councillor Cole has said about emails going astray. We had a case of it first thing this morning where emails have gone astray. I don't know what can be done about that. It's technology and it's a fact of life, they go astray. But Andy and I will keep in close contact to produce that report.
Thank you very much indeed. It was a very lengthy agenda to the Skills Committee, but I think some very pertinent questions arose from our league members and some very interesting questions, a fundamental principle, which was good to hear and good to see in action. I watched that on the Zoom. So thank you very much indeed for your contributions to that, and look forward to receiving a template for your rapporteur proposal in March or April. Councillor van der Weyer is next with the housing responsibility.
Yes, thank you. So in March, scheduled for the Housing Committee and then for the board, there's a consideration of the purpose and function of the combined authorities housing activities into the future. So I think there's probably be a role for us there to look at that. The Housing Committee seems to be meeting on the 9th of March, then with the board on the 30th of March. So perhaps we could consider whether we can include that in our own work programme.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Atkins next on climate change and environment.
Thank you, Chair. Two updates from me. So at the March Combined Authority Board meeting, they're discussing their sort of climate change strategy and next steps. I'd anticipate that being an agenda item for our March meeting 2 days previously, with more details to follow. I'd also draw members' attention to, we discussed previously the new projects now included in the medium-term financial strategy of the Combined Authority. Included in that are some substantial capital programmes addressing climate change issues, so I'd expect to see those rolled into that climate strategy, but that's currently where the money is at in terms of responses to the challenges of climate change.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Atkins. And finally, Councillor Councillor Davey, you wanted to...
Yeah, it was just a follow on from what Councillor Atkins has said. I think that some of the projects, because they're across the whole authority, it'd be great to have learning shared between the authorities, because I think there's much that could be shared. And I just hope that that comes out, and particularly around climate change, because there are real implications for all authorities, I think, as a result. If that's feasible, I don't know how. I mean, we'll presumably find out in due course how that's going to work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Finally, Councillor Dew.
Thank you, Chair. A very simple one on the business board. They met last month. Items of interest from my point of view is the continuing work being done regarding the university in Peterborough, which I know overlaps with other areas such as the skills work that's being done, and also the fact that they've got 2 new board members up, so they seem to have quite a well balanced board. It's not too much SME or too much academic, so I'm looking forward to that being a more successful body going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to rewind and go back to Councillor Atkins, who I think wanted to come back on the climate change issue. No, that's fine. Councillor Goldsack, were you indicating?
Yeah, forgive me if this is not the right place and I could do with some direction here, but I would have loved to have the opportunity to ask the mayoral question about this, as there was so much discussion at that point about active travel. But as you will all know, we've got a new station in the town of Soham, and we've run a consultation period for active travel to and from the station from the town, which has been fabulous. And that's now concluded, and they're going through the results of that. But I don't know whether this is something that perhaps Dave could pick up for me and ask, or whether I have to go direct. But the bus company, Stagecoach, who run the very few buses that come through Soham from a Newmarket to Ely and back direction, are saying, no, we're not going to go down to the station. And I'm just like, well, hang on a second. So we've got active travel, so we can walk, but the buses from the street won't be able to get down there. And I find that so disappointing that, well, to be honest with you, my phrase is that once again, we found an example of a tail wagging the dog. And I think it's time that we turned it around.
Thank you. Could I suggest two possible routes? The first one would be the Mayor's next mayoral question time on the 25th of March, in which anybody can submit a question. So that might be a suitable topic for a question to the Mayor. Then the second route might be we have a triumvirate of members amongst ourselves with a sort of transport responsibility. Councillors Bagent, Davey and Hay. Councillor Hay has the bus review responsibility, but I wonder whether you might want to initiate, not for discussion now, but with them, how you might want to progress that further. Councillor Bagent, you're indicating as if there's something that needs to be said.
Briefly,
now.
if you could pass the details to me, I could perhaps bring it up at the GCP, because this is the sort of thing that the GCP are really keen on. I know it might not come.
Soham is not in the GCP area.
I know,
so I'm
but
not
that
sure
doesn't-
the bus
that
services
doesn't-
in Soham will be of much interest to them.
Yeah, but that doesn't limit the GCP's ability.
Right, I think a discussion behind the scenes about the capacity and interest of the GCP outside the geographical remit of its responsibilities will be one to be had. Councillor Miscandler.
We have exactly the same scenario in Wickersea, where the station isn't in the centre of the town and stagecoaches point blank refuse. We're not going down there, despite them having a new bus depot in the centre of town. They just refuse to go down there. It's exactly the same as Councillor Goldsack said for so.
Commercialisation of bus services a
Can I-
long
can I
time
s-
ago has a lot to answer for. I'm reluctant to start a long discussion about bus services at this point, but I will take two very, very brief interventions from councillors Bagent and Hay respectively.
Yeah, can I say the same to you as well? Because whilst it's outside of the GCP area, it involves people that would be travelling by car into the GCP area. So it's something I'm sure that they take up. So if you can just give me the detail.
Well, thank you. Let's find a way outside this meeting to resolve this. Councillor Hay.
May I suggest that Roland Potter, the officer at the Mine Authority, they will shortly be doing consultations on whether they go down the enhanced partnership or franchising route. And as part of that, I would suggest that if any members have concerns about the refusal of any bus company to do certain routes, they should let Roland Potter know, because surely that will form part of his consultation where the routes should go.
Thank you. So there's some suggestions there, Councillor Goldsack, for how that might be pursued. So thank you all to lead members for those updates. Item 9 on our agenda is the Combined Authority Board agenda. The board meets on Wednesday. And can I ask whether there is any question that you would like me to ask on your behalf at the board meeting? Councillor Davey.
I suppose, Lawrence, sorry, Chair, it's just to clarify, we did get the chance to ask about the future process around the new bids that have come in. It's whether or not you think, and I'll take your advice, whether or not we should actually formally put a brief question in about that or not. I know that John and Paul will have heard what we've said, it's whether or not we should formalise that. So I take your advice accordingly.
I'm in the hands of members because we do this collectively. I'm not allowed to go out on a limb here. So collectively, what is the view about the value of asking a specific question on Wednesday about the bid process and the publication around that? Not seeing a lot. Councillor Sharp.
I share Councillor Davies' concerns about the bid process, and it was, you know, as I said earlier, I just feel it was rustled together in a lot of haste. I'm not sure what the question would be, though, that we would pose, would be my comment. Yeah, so I think we've got the difficulty with, yeah.
Okay. So leaving it, right, okay. I'm not seeing any other hands up for any other questions, so, right, okay, thank you very much indeed. We have no specific questions, which I think is a good sign, actually, that we're beginning to work slightly better in terms of getting into these issues a bit earlier and finding the kind of different ways of working that came out of the review of how we we do scrutiny, so I think that's a positive. The work programme is the next item on our agenda. We have a work programme proposed. We have, firstly, a reserve date of February. In view of the officer changes on the skills side, I'm suggesting that we not only drop the skills item that is in the agenda in the work plan for February to a future date once we are clearer about who is going to be in a position at officer level to brief us on that. But as a consequence of that, because there are no other substantive items in February, that we drop the reserve date altogether. So are members content for us to drop the reserve date and not hold a meeting in February? There's no board meeting immediately following it either. Following on from that then, looking at the March date, we have the mayor's question time, which is not, as we understand it, under our control. And it is separate from our next meeting. It's on the 25th of March and we meet on Monday the 28th. So can I suggest that we have some informal discussions between ourselves and the Combined Authority Mayoral Office and Chief Executive to be clear what the process is for our interface with that, so that we can do whatever is needful, because we will not be meeting formally between now and that event. Are you happy for us to do that as a way of being clear what our role is in that? And then on the March meeting, there have been a couple of suggestions emerging from our lead members' reports on the forward plan to go into potentially a March agenda. In fact, I think there are three. There was one on climate change, there was one on the Combined Authority's role on housing, and there was the possibility that we might by then have a template on the rapporteur work to be done on community education. Those are three quite substantial items potentially, or the template probably less than the others. Not that the piece of work is less substantial, but that agreeing the template is less substantial. Are you content to put all those forward for the March agenda, with the understanding that the template might slip to April? To have those two pieces of work, housing and climate change, coming to the March meeting. Is that the wish of this committee? Because I don't think there's anything substantive on the agenda on the forward plan for March. Other than that, no, there isn't. So should we do that then? Have those two items as main items? Yeah, excellent. And then we don't have anything as a main item yet in April, but that may change. Councillor Goldsack.
At the bottom of page 80, and going on to page 81 of our pack, there's a list of the 6 things that we particularly wanted. The third one of which I feel has just gone quiet now. I did read the December meeting, having been unable to be there myself, but you know, that will be post budget. It should be a fairly short answer and a fairly short paper, I would imagine. I would have thought this is something that we should be pushing to come in March, April time. You know, we're coming up to a year of being in office. The first decision made was to can it. I think we were only told to understand what the costs of canning it were and where we're at.
Right. Okay. So for the benefit of those who haven't got sight of the work plan, which I'm thinking primarily of the public, there are 6 items proposed but not confirmed. The first being affordable housing, which we're now looking at as being a March item. The second being the active travel agenda, which I think we've had a bit of a discussion about today and will be an ongoing item. I think the issue is probably going to be contained within our view of the local transport and connectivity plan as it comes to us, as it's ready, unless there's something that needs to be done between now and the next stage of that plan's preparation. CAM, yes, point just made. Then e-scooters, we've had a discussion about already this morning in the questions with the mayor, and we've been promised some sort of response back. So perhaps we can take a view on what needs to be done once we've seen that. Skills, we've already said that we would want to move that back a bit until we know who's going to be there at officer level to do that. And then finance items, I think we've made a point about ongoing consultation on the budget, and we've been promised some responses back on that as well. Does that summarise where people think we are or ought to be with those 6 items? So in that case, the main issue there would seem to be where we want to go with CAM, and as Councillor Davey is our mayor responsible for, a member responsible for looking at CAM, Councillor Davey.
The question was simply going to be, do you want me to do some work on it in advance? We did ask Roland last week at the meeting, and we didn't get much of a response. It was linked odd enough into Aidan's question about connectivity rather than specifically about the CAM. But I'm happy to do some work if that's required.
Thank you.
I think my point was that we asked the questions, and I don't think we've ever had an actual answer to it. That's kind of obvious. So I think we should be saying, well, look, by the March meeting or by the April meeting, I'm not that fussed which, we deserve answers to our questions that we've been asked. That's as simple as that.
In which case, I'll go back on as per Mark's suggestion and get something ready according to the March meeting.
Thank you very much indeed. That's helpful. So is that all we need to do with respect to our forward work plan? I think it is. Thank you very much indeed. In which case, the date of the next meeting is not the 21st of February, but the 28th of March. So I look forward to seeing you all then. And thank you very much indeed for your attendance and input today. And thank you to officers for facilitating the meeting. Thank you.